It's always good to gather for worship and to begin to plot out the week in front of us. And as we do, I don't know if you're aware that when the week unfolds for a believer, it is a week that is indicative of the road less traveled. It is a place that we find ourselves in, that we go through life not with a spirit of fear or uncertainty or worry, but rather with an assurance that God is with us no matter what. And that's really what I want to explore today, because part of the problem is we have a tendency to put ourselves in front of everything that God's doing and not include Him along the way. We're pretty strong-willed. And I see an illustration of this almost daily in my life. And that illustration is in the form of our dog Nigel. Now Nigel is a terrier, and does a few things well regarding responses that he needs to give back to me based on commands that I offer. Usually there has to be food involved in some form, otherwise he disregards it completely. The other morning, I saw this in him. I was meeting with the elders for prayer on Friday morning, and I for whatever reason, I overslept, and we were meeting at 5:30, and I woke up at 5:26. I texted Jason Austin, and I said, Jason, I'll be there in probably about 15 minutes. So I thought if everything goes according to plan, I will be where I need to be at exactly 7, or rather 5. 5:45. Thank you. Yeah. Unfortunately, at my house, because we have lots of family members, the four-legged variety, when I get up, they get up, and then it becomes a production. All of a sudden, their needs become needs that are so critical that I need to address them first. So our cat wanted out. I'm thinking, all right, I can let the cat out, and then I'm out the door. Well, Nigel decided that if the cat's racing out, he's going to follow it. And off he goes into the darkness, who knows where. And I'm like, unbelievable. I text Jason back and I said, I don't know when I'm going to get in there. The dog just left. He's unreliable, and I don't know how long this is going to take. He's pretty strong-willed. Well, the one thing I had going for me was the fact that it was cold outside. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to finish getting ready, and if he's at the door, fine. If not, then I guess the search is on. Well, I got ready, and there he was. He had a need, and that was to be warm, and I had what he needed, and so he came. And I look at what he does in response to the things that he needs, and I realize that if it's food or warmth, we're best friends. But if it's something that involves what he's interested in, like a smell that is just irresistible, he's in his own world doing his own thing. And I think God gives us these little animals to just remind us sometimes of the ways that we interact with Him. Like when we need something, we'll come and we'll pay attention to Him. But when we're doing our own thing, we just can't tune into Him very well. And I think a lot of the times it's the fact that we just don't want to give up control. Control of our lives, control of our world, control of our agenda. And when the Apostle Paul was writing the books to the Corinthian church that ended up being compiled in 2 letters, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, this was the primary issue. Was everybody was like my dog Nigel. They kind of wanted to do their own thing until they got in trouble. And then Paul had to write something about it to say, the problem is you're putting yourselves first in this equation, and it just doesn't work that way. And as Paul wrote those words, it foreshadowed what God could expect with humanity from that time to this day. And that is, people want God in their lives, but they don't necessarily want to go down that road less traveled. Mostly because we want to control everything ourselves, a lot of times it's because we don't quite trust that God has our own best interest in mind. And so this morning, I want to look at a few things from 1 Corinthians. I'd like to just take a look at what Paul said in those verses. So if we could just go to that slide. Sorry, guys. I'm experimenting a little bit, so just bear with me. Let's just be audible audiobooks for just a second. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care. For no one can lay a foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is. Because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames. Now, where's Paul going with that? He's essentially saying that there's a church that I'm having to write this letter to where everybody's wanting to do it their own way, but as a result of that, the church isn't hanging together as well as it needs to. And at the end of the day, all that really is there that is of substance is the fact that we have some souls that are saved, and that's about all Paul can say. And in response to that, he's wanting the people within the church collectively to realign their lives in such a way that at every turn, Jesus is at the center of the equation. But the problem is, as we discovered last week, in some form or another, we still want to be at the center with Jesus off in the periphery. So I want to show you from last week how we put ourselves first in relation to God. And it is through these 4 images that I think it best defines it. And I want to recap for just a second. There are some of us, as we come to faith, we feel like there is a God, and our lives are under God, and we, maybe if we get everything in order, that is, if we just obey all the principles, if we just do the right things, God will bless us. If we don't get everything exactly in order, well, then our lives aren't going to work. And it is a desire to try to get everything perfectly aligned with God's Word, God's will, God's principles. And when we do those things, we know we'll be blessed. But when Jesus came, he said, there are a lot of you who are trying to do that, but the problem is you're still disconnected from God. Sure, you're relating to him, but you're not connected to him in a way that is life-giving. Many people will find that they've obeyed all the rules, they've done all the right things, and it would appear that around them, other people are thriving who aren't obeying the rules, who aren't doing the right things. And sometimes when we obey the rules and do the right things, bad things happen to us, and then we're like, God, where were you? And the whole time, the problem isn't so much God or even the rules. It's the fact that we're trying to leverage God in some way by obeying some rules for our own end. There are some of us who, maybe we haven't gotten that far, we just have a view of the world that says, this is my domain, I am living my life the way I want to live my life, and I have my family, I have my work, we have God over here, but at the end of the day, I'm in charge. And most of the time, I don't pay a lot of attention to God other than when I have a deep crisis, and then I may ask for help. But the problem again is me. I'm putting myself first. The other one could be, look, God, I know that you have what I need. I'm broken. I'm perhaps desperate. Maybe I just need forgiveness, or maybe my relationship with my wife or my kids isn't working well. And so I'm going to go to church, and I'm going to see what you can do to help me. And as I do that, I'm just going to try to, like a good consumer, find those resources at church that will help me in my life in the way that only church can help me out. And so it's a life that says, I'm going to take those things that I find in a religious environment so that the things in my life that are out of whack that I know God can help me with, I'm going to get from him. But again, it's still God over here, me over here. It's still about me in some way trying to define how I should live based on my own rules. And then there's life for God. I could be that guy that says, hey, God, I want to have a purpose that gives my life significance. I'm not just going to be a pastor. I'm going to be a missionary in some faraway land. And I'm going to just burn everything for you. And I'm going to put you first. And I'm going to serve that mission. And I'm going to do great things for you and for your kingdom. But then we end up worshiping the mission. And when the mission doesn't go well, we say, God, why did you let me down? Again, all the things that I'm mentioning, they're not bad places to be, but they're bad places to stay. And the primary reason why they're not a good place to stay is because they're still about us. And Paul said, if you're using any one of those four approaches to help build your faith and to help build the church, there's not going to be much there. You're going to be lucky to get out of that as one who's just escaping the flames. And you may be asking, well, I can kind of relate to those four, but where do I go from there? And what I would suggest is coming a little bit closer to God, to live a life with God. The life with God starts with communication. We talk to God, God talks to us. Many times when that happens, God is just pulling us close. He's actually pulling us out of ourselves. In effect, he's saying, I want you to put me first in everything. I want you to go so far as to deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me wherever. And there are some of us who've said, we've been down those other four roads, and this is where we're at. And what do we have to lose? And so, God, I'm yours. Do with me what you will. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, invite me into that experience that you have together. Make that community that you're a part of a community that I can be a part of as well. And just be with me through the course of the day. And that's life with God. It goes from communication in that way to actually communion, where we, in a sense, become one in our thoughts, in our approach, and in all those ways. And it's not like it's a more enlightened Christianity. The fact of the matter is anybody can do it at any time. But here's the problem. If you're like me, every day I struggle with the fact that I still want to be in control. And here's why. Because the world that you and I live in is a scary world. There are lots of things that are threatening. Even in the realm of jobs, it's not like perhaps when our parents and grandparents could go and find employment and they could just lock it in and then be retired and have a pension at the end. It's always uncertain. The rules are being changed one day and then they're being changed again. And many of us feel like, man, the world is a scary place. There are so many uncertainties around us. There are people leading governmentally who are making decisions that impact my life negatively. There are companies that are buying up companies that I'm a part of. And in all of this turmoil, we can't help but be afraid. And what I think God is allowing to happen in your life and mine is for us to come to terms to the fact that apart from God, there is no security. That security in anything apart from God is just an illusion. It can't happen. We can try to hedge our bets and accumulate as much money as we possibly can. We can try to work out physically so that our health is as the best that it can possibly be. We can try to do all of those things to ensure that whatever our security or well-being needs are, that they can at least be managed. But at the end of the day, everything that you have can be taken away in a moment. And Jesus talked about a wealthy farmer who built these structures that enabled him to basically kick back and retire. And he could say, I'm warm, I'm well fed, I am well resourced with all of this security that I have in these grain bins, only to find out that God says, your time here on earth is done. And so what do? And I think that the thing that you have to do is you have to go from fearing to trusting. Well, let's just look at fear for a second as an image. In fear, we have something that creates it, don't we? Danger. And believe me, there are dangers all over the place. You just can't avoid them. Just when you think it's safe, it's not safe. And just when you think that a source of danger is benign, all of a sudden you find that it really is a problem. My mom was telling me, my mom had to get her driver's license renewed, and she's 85, and she's been sort of doing this a little bit, like, I hope I can get my license. I said, Mom, can you see? Yeah. Have you been driving your car? Yeah. Have you ever had a ticket? No. Ever? No. How long you been driving? Since I was 16. You ever been in a car wreck? No. Not since you're 16? Honest? You're telling me, a pastor? I'm a pastor here. You got to tell me. I know I'm your son, but you can't lie to me. No. I'm like, Mom, that's awesome. You're going to do fine. So she called me up 2 days ago, and she said, guess what? I passed. I passed my driver's license test. And she was just celebrating it and elated. And as she was, carrying on the other day about not hitting any cars or having any accidents or anything like that, I'm like, that's awesome. I haven't hit any cars or had any accidents in a long time either. And the next day I'm driving down the road, and I see this building, and I'm like, oh, I've never seen that building before. And I look at the car in front of me, and it stopped. And I'm like, I thought about my mother's conversation right then and there. I've never had an accident. And I'm like, great, I can't wait to report this back to her. Jammed on the brakes, and I think God just said, Leonard, he needs lots of help. We're going to make sure he doesn't hit that car. And I didn't hit that car. And I was so thankful, because I should have hit the car, because I was distracted, not by my phone, but by just a feature on the roadside. As a pastor, I became a danger for somebody else. And I noticed that when the car in front of them that had turned, when it opened up, this car started driving really fast away from me. I saw fear in his eyes in the rearview mirror. Because no matter where you go, there are dangers in places predictable and unpredictable. But the pattern always goes like this. There's the danger, there's the response of fear, and then there's the desire to be in control of things to keep us from having to be subjected to the effects of danger, only to find that cycle just continues over and over and over. And we do everything that we can to prevent that cycle from happening, don't we? But what God says, you may try to sort of have your world all together and God over here. You may try to have all the principles and everything in line so that you'll be protected by perfect obedience, but you find that life still has a way of undermining that desire to control in that way. You may say, I'm going to get what I can from God so that I'll be safe. But we find that it rains on the godly and the ungodly alike. You may say, I'm going to pour out my life for you, God, so you should take care of me, only to find that you still have problems and trouble. And you know what God says? There's a cycle that you're a part of. And the reason why my son Jesus came was so that you could relate to that cycle differently. I want to tell a little story about a person named Henry Nouwen. Maybe some of you have heard of him, maybe you haven't, but he was a professor at Yale and at Harvard, and then eventually went on to just serve people. He quit that job and he went and he served people, and he wrote, and he said, I just want to give my life in service because that's what God wants me to do, and I am most content in that place. I feel the safest in that place. I feel like I feel totally at peace in that place. But there was a journey that he had to take to get there, and a defining moment in his life was when he was in Germany and he was watching a South African trapeze act. And I guess it was the first time that he really thought about what was going on when he saw the trapeze artist come off of the rope and then begin to spin around. He's just totally and completely enthralled by the gymnastics of what he's seeing and the fearlessness of what's happening. And as he's seeing the beauty of that acrobatic display, a thought occurs to him that that person is able to do all of those really incredible gymnastics because of one thing. That person has perfect peace to perform that act because they know that at the end of that particular set of motions, there are going to be hands that come to grab him or her and lead them back into safety. And he just saw that repeated over and over in the act, and he said, I just discovered something about myself and about God. That God in very, very much is that person who says, despite everything that would appear to be the case, I'm here to catch you. I am here with you. And you are free to do the things that I call you to do in all of their beautiful display, whatever they may be. And as you do them, even though there are threats out there that are untold, as you do them, I am here to catch you. Now, why did he have that confidence? Because he knew in Scripture that the God that he worshiped was a good God, was a loving God, was defined in his very character as good and loving, meaning that he looks at us with eyes of incredible care and compassion. And the best way, I think, to illustrate that characteristic that God has for you and I is no farther than that image up on the back of the worship center here, of Jesus as the shepherd. You know the most famous Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. And then he goes on to say, he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I'm going to stay right there for a second. In 2005, in the country of Turkey, there is a little town called Givas. And the USA Today reported that there were 450 sheep that were grazing on a hillside that just walked over a cliff and died. They just followed each other, one after another after another. Only the thing was, there wasn't just 450 of them. There were 1,500 of them. And the funny but not so funny thing about the story was, after 450 of them landed, the rest of them just fell on top of them, and it was a nice cushion, and then they just walked off. Oh. And as you look at that, you're thinking, that is horrifying and sort of weird and sort of funny. But the big question in the back of everybody's mind was, where were the shepherds? Because sheep, as we know, are not they're not very intelligent animals. I mean, dogs, at least they can figure out how to come in and out of the cold. They can figure out how to find food. Dolphins don't have any problems because they're really good in the way that their minds work. Sheep, not so much. And here's the unflattering thing about that, is that when God looks at us, one of the metaphors that he used to describe you and I, guess what it is? Sheep. Why? Why? Because as those 450 sheep are going off the cliff, you and I know we've all done some pretty dumb things in our lives. You may be saying, speak for yourself, Pastor. But if you're honest and you take your ego out of the way, you got to agree with me. God sees that day in and day out. And then he sees all of the dangers that surround us. And then you know what he says? Relax. I'm your shepherd. I am watching out for you. I will take care of you. Stay close to me, and I'll stay close to you. And when you do, you may go through some difficult times. You may go through some dark valleys, but you are there with me. You will never leave me. And I want to assure you, he never will. I'm just going to wind this little time together down with another story. And some of you may remember back in the late 50s, early 60s, the civil rights movement was beginning to get traction in the South. And in the late 50s, there was a lot happening in Alabama, and some of us perhaps even remember on the news the story of Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old seamstress who gets on a bus, who is told to stand, and she goes and she sits down. And the driver says, you need to stand up. And she says, I'm not going to stand up. And then when everybody gets on the bus that are of the same color, they also sit down, and then it begins. And what occurs in Alabama is just sort of like what has been simmering for so long. And in light of that, there is a 20-something, fairly fresh, out of seminary person named Martin Luther King Jr., who is called into Alabama to lead at a church, and he does. But what happens is he's sort of, through circumstances that are out of his control, he's asked by some of the other leaders to begin to head up a movement that would protest the human injustices that were happening around him. And he's like, I'm not so sure about that. But when the developers of this committee said, we want to host this at your church, which they did, and he began to realize that as the new pastor on the block, he was kind of being railroaded into this role, which he took on. And as he did, it created so much disturbances socially within that very segregated environment that on January 27th in 1957, he received a phone call, and the guy said, using the N-word, I want you to stop making a mess of everything, because if you don't do what we tell you to do in 3 days, we will blow your brains out and we will blow up your house. Well, days went on, and a few days later, he's walking back home to see his house engulfed in flames. Obviously, he's concerned about his family, but very quickly discovers that they're okay. But what affected him as he walked up to that scene was a second voice he had heard 3 days prior. Knowing that his life was being threatened in such a manner, he got up in the middle of the night, poured himself a cup of coffee, sat down, put his face in his hands, and he just began to ask God, why? What am I supposed to do here? And he heard this voice. God said, I want you to stand up for what is right, what is just, and what is loving. And lo, I am with you always. I will never, ever, ever leave you. And as audibly as he heard that voice, that fear that he had that was beginning to cycle through danger and through control was replaced with a new cycle. And I want to show what that cycle looks like before I continue on. It looks something like this. God sees what you and I go through. And perhaps our dangers aren't as severe as that, but they are clearly real to us. And what he wants to do is he wants to take our understanding of how we relate to those things only through ourselves, through our own control, through our own ego, through our own desire to do it our way. And in a spirit of surrender, say, Lord, I'm going to trust you no matter what. And God says, I got your back. And there's a safety that happens in that is profound and otherworldly and immortal and eternal. And that safety leads to a sense of security and faith. And that faith just continues that cycle of trusting and surrender. And just knowing that God is in the middle of this equation. And when Martin Luther King was walking up to his house in a spirit of surrender, trusting that God was with him no matter what, and he had absolute faith that he could begin to lead in a very volatile set of circumstances, he got up on his smoldering porch and told the crowd that had gathered around with sticks and bottles and bats and other weaponry, just waiting to retaliate. And as he's beginning to speak, police are descending upon the scene, white police, and he can see this begin to escalate. And he tells everybody, calm down. That what happened clearly is a bad thing, but what God wants from us is truth and what is right and what is just and what is loving. And he told the people of the same color to look at the white people there. And he said, I want you to look at them with eyes of love. I want you to do what you can to build them up. And it just became disarming. The weapons all dropped to the ground. And there was a sense in the air that what should have happened based on our own sense of control didn't. But rather, this wave of peace just went across everything. And it really began to change the climate and the interaction and the conversations. Not to say that there weren't a lot of disruptions. And some of you may be saying right about now as I end this, yeah, that's all well and good. But show the picture again of Martin Luther King. April 4th, 1968. You know what happened there. But here's the thing. There are two takeaways from this. One is, we have to have a posture that trusts God no matter what. No matter what. And the second thing is why. Because God said, even in this life, if they take your life, it's only going to get better. Paul said to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. It is better to be with the Lord than to be here in the body. And he understood that something changed in the empty tomb that changed everything. And you and I are going to die at some point. There's no getting around that. And we have to make our peace with that. But what people do who surrender their lives to God begin to lose that deep attachment that their ego says, at all costs, you got to save this. But at the greatest cost, Jesus already saved it. And what God is saying to us, don't just be thinking, well, when I die, I hope I go to heaven. I hope I'm resurrected. You know what God's saying? When you became a part of my family, you actually started living eternally. Your body may die at any time. It can happen at any point. And we're very uncomfortable with that initially. But once we surrender, it doesn't really matter. Because like the trapeze artist who's waiting to receive the person that is doing all of those beautiful artistic gymnastics, God is saying, I got you. And I've done a lot of funerals, and leading up to those funerals, this is what I see consistently. A person is getting ready to go to be with the Lord. Everybody knows it. And then this will happen. You'll see them do this. And you'll see their eyes open up in realization. And you'll see them maybe mention a loved one. And it's like God is saying, I just want to give you a little bit of a preview of where I'm taking you. And I know it's got to be comforting and permission giving, because all of a sudden everything about this life no longer matters. Because the vision that we saw through the eyes of faith begins to be the vision that is seen through the eyes of immortality. The resurrection isn't about just hope when I die, I go to heaven. It is about changing everything about how we view safety in this life, how we view threats in this life, how we view fear in this life. God will never, never, never give up on us. He will always love us as a good shepherd. He will always care for us. And whatever He allows to happen, He will always lead us through it. And when it's the scariest moment of all, He will find a way to say to you, it's okay. Trust me. When you do, that fear, it does melt away. And God says, I'm here. We're in communion together. We're in the same community together. And we're going to live forever. You can only see that, though, through the eyes of faith. And I pray, as I've given this message, that you will trust God with those kind of eyes as we surrender together in a spirit of hope and love and confidence that He's there to catch us.